Some people spend years, quietly, painfully, waiting for their life to change on its own. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly waiting. Going to sleep each night telling themselves that tomorrow will somehow be different. That next month something will shift. That maybe next year, finally, things will be different. And the years keep moving. And the life stays the same. And somewhere deep inside, they know it. They feel it. But they don't know how to stop it. If that feels familiar, if something just moved inside your chest when you heard those words, then listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Because this is not a speech about motivation. This is not about getting excited for a few days and then fading back into the same old patterns. This is about something far more important than that. This is about understanding your life is exactly where it is right now, and how 6 deliberate months, just 6, can begin to rewrite everything. Here's the truth. The life you are living today is not an accident. It is the result of who you have been. Your habits, your thinking, your daily decisions, your small surrenders, all of it has been quietly building the life you now stand in. And the life you will live 5 years from now? That is being built right now. In the choices you make today. In the discipline you practice or avoid. In the stories you tell yourself about what is possible. You are not a victim of your circumstances. You are, whether you know it or not, the architect of them. The life you will have in 5 years is being quietly constructed right now, in the ordinary moments you believe don't matter. Now understand this. Most people hear that and feel something between guilt and defensiveness. Because we have been trained to look outward for the reason our life isn't working. The economy. The family we were born into. The people who let us down. The bad timing. And yes, life is genuinely unfair sometimes. I won't pretend otherwise. But here is what I have learned from watching people closely for a very long time. 2 people can face the same difficulty, the same setback, the same starting point, and in 6 months, one of them will have moved forward and one will still be standing in the same place. The difference is never the circumstance. The difference is always the decision. Think about a young man I knew, call him Daniel. Daniel was 29 years old, working a job he had long stopped caring about, living in the same apartment he swore he'd leave 2 years ago, telling anyone who would listen about the business he was going to start someday. He was smart. Genuinely. Thoughtful. People liked him. But Daniel had a habit that was costing him everything, and he didn't even recognize it as a habit. His habit was waiting. Waiting to feel ready. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting until the kids were older, until he had more money saved, until things settled down. And in the meantime, the days dissolved into each other like sugar in warm water. Quietly. Completely. Without a trace. One afternoon Daniel sat down with a piece of paper, not out of inspiration, but out of exhaustion. He was tired of the gap between the man he imagined himself being and the man he actually was. And he wrote one question at the top of the page. Not what do I want? He had asked that 100 times. He wrote something different. He wrote, span class equals emphasis who do I need to become? /span and that question, that single shift from wanting to becoming, began to change everything for Daniel. Because wanting keeps you on the outside looking in. Becoming pulls you through the door. Ask yourself that question right now. Not what you want. Not what you wish would happen. Who do you need to become? What does that person read? How does that person spend a Tuesday evening? What does that person do when they feel lazy, when they feel defeated, when everything seems to resist them? Because here is what I have come to know deeply, the person you are becoming in private will eventually show up in public. The discipline no one sees becomes the life everyone notices. Let me tell you about 6 months. Not a year. Not a decade. 6 months. Because sometimes when we think about transforming our lives, we make the timeline so large that it loses all reality. A year feels abstract. 5 years feels like a fantasy. But 6 months, you can feel that. You can hold that in your hands. 6 months ago is real. You remember 6 months ago. You know exactly how fast it passed. And that means you also know exactly how much could change in the next 6 months if you simply decided to use them differently than you used the last 6. The problem isn't time. Most people have enough time. The problem is that time keeps passing without a clear structure placed inside it. Days become weeks and weeks become months and months become the quiet grief of another year gone by. Structure is not a cage. Structure is what gives time meaning. And meaning is what gives a human being momentum. Here's what I mean. Think about the difference between a river and a swamp. A swamp has water, often plenty of it. But it has no direction. No flow. No momentum. The water just sits there, warm and stagnant, slowly losing its vitality. Now a river has the same water, sometimes less. But it has banks. It has direction. And because of that, it carves through stone. It creates life along its edges. It reaches the ocean. The only difference between the swamp and the river is structure. Banks that say, this is where the water goes. Your life is the water. The 6-month plan is the banks. Without them, your energy, your ambition, your intelligence, all of it sits there, swirling in place, generating warmth but going nowhere. The plan doesn't restrict you. It releases you. It takes all that potential that has been sitting inside you and gives it somewhere to flow. Discipline is not what the world takes from you. It is the thing that quietly gives you yourself back. Now I want to talk about something that most people never address honestly, and it is the real reason why plans fail. Not bad planning. Not lack of information. Not the wrong strategy. The real reason plans fail is that the person making the plan never truly decided to become someone different. They made a plan for their current self to do different things. And the current self, with all its comfortable habits and familiar fears, quietly dismantles the plan over the first 2 weeks. Have you noticed this pattern in yourself? You get fired up, you write the goals, you feel the electricity of possibility, and then slowly, almost invisibly, the old routines creep back in. The old voice returns. And by month 2, the plan is just a piece of paper somewhere in a drawer. That is not a motivation problem. That is an identity problem. You cannot sustainably live above your identity. If you believe deep down that you are not a disciplined person, every act of discipline feels like a performance, exhausting, unnatural, temporary. But the moment you begin to genuinely see yourself differently, the moment I am not disciplined becomes I am building discipline, the whole mechanism changes. You are no longer fighting against yourself. You are constructing yourself. I once spoke with a woman, a mother of 3, overworked, exhausted in the particular way that people who care deeply about everyone else are exhausted. She hadn't invested in herself in years. She laughed at the idea of a personal plan, the way people laugh at things they secretly want but are afraid to believe they deserve. My time is not my own, she said. And I understood that. I didn't argue with it. Instead, I asked her one question. I asked her, what would it mean for your children if their mother became someone who was genuinely thriving? She went quiet for a long moment. Because she had never once thought about her own growth as something she was doing for them. She had thought of it as something selfish. Something she had to earn. And that single reframe, from selfishness to stewardship, opened something in her. She began waking up 45 minutes earlier. Not to add hours to her workday. But to build herself. To read. To plan. To sit with her own thoughts. And 6 months later she called me. Her voice was different. Not because her circumstances had dramatically changed. But because she had changed. And the changed person was beginning to change the circumstances. That is always the order. You change first. Then the life changes. Not the other way around. Most people are waiting for the life to change so they feel motivated to change themselves. But that sequence never comes. The motivation doesn't arrive before the action. It arrives because of it. You move first. In the dark. Without certainty. Without guarantees. And gradually, as the months pass, the evidence begins to accumulate. Small proofs. Small wins. And those small wins begin to rewrite the story you tell about yourself. Let me speak now about the specific rhythm of a 6-month commitment, because there is a psychology to it that most people miss. The first month is the hardest. Not because the work is hardest, it usually isn't. It is hardest because you are fighting against the gravitational pull of everything you've been. Your old habits don't surrender without resistance. Your old voice doesn't go quiet without a fight. The first month is almost entirely psychological. You are not building the life yet, you are demolishing the belief that you cannot. Then something interesting happens around month 2 and 3. The resistance softens slightly. The new behavior starts to feel less foreign. You begin to have a few days in a row where you do the thing you committed to, and it doesn't feel like a battle. It just feels like what you do now. This is the most delicate period, because it is also when most people unconsciously slow down. The urgency of the first month fades, and without the adrenaline of beginning, the discipline must now come from something deeper. From identity. From the new version of yourself that is slowly taking shape. Month 4 is where the magic starts to become visible. The compound effect, which has been working invisibly all along, begins to produce results you can actually see and feel. The body changes. The finances shift. The relationships deepen or clarify. The work gets better. And crucially, the way other people respond to you changes. Because you are different. Not dramatically. Not perfectly. But measurably. And that external confirmation feeds the internal transformation. Think about it this way. A pilot adjusts course slightly, just a few degrees. In the first hour, you wouldn't notice. You'd look out the window and see the same clouds. But over 10 hours, over 20 hours, the destination changes completely. A few degrees sustained over 6 months does not produce a slightly different life. It produces an entirely different life. The same effort, the same person, the same 24 hours in a day, but directed with consistency and intention. That is the arithmetic of transformation. Small plus consistent equals profound. I knew a businessman who had spent 15 years chasing shortcuts. Not because he was lazy, he wasn't. He worked extremely hard. But his effort was scattered. He jumped between ideas. He started things and abandoned them before the compound interest had time to accumulate. He was always beginning. Never arriving. And one day a mentor of his said something that finally landed. He said, "Stop looking for the big break. Start looking for the small habit you're willing to protect for the rest of your life." One habit. Protected. Every day. That was the instruction. Not a 5-step system. Not a complicated strategy. One habit, protected. The businessman chose reading 30 minutes every morning before he opened his phone or checked his messages. Just that. For 6 months. And at the end of those 6 months, he said the reading itself wasn't what changed him. What changed him was the proof. The proof that he could commit to something and not abandon it. That proof changed the way he approached everything else. You are not looking for the habit that changes everything. You are looking for the proof that you are someone who keeps their promises to themselves. Let me ask you something. How many years have you been telling yourself the same story about why change isn't possible yet? How many January 1sts have you offered yourself a new beginning, only to find yourself standing in the same place by February? What is the specific, familiar voice that shows up in the second week of any new effort and tells you that this time is no different, that you're fooling yourself, that the old version of you always wins? Do you know that voice? Can you name it? Because you cannot outrun something you haven't named. That voice is not the truth. That voice is a habit. It developed because somewhere along the way, you stopped a few times and the voice learned that stopping worked. It learned that if it spoke loudly enough and convincingly enough, you would rest. And so it got practiced. It got good at its job. It knows exactly what to say. It sounds like realism. It sounds like wisdom. But it is just fear wearing sensible clothes. And here's what I want you to understand about fear. Fear of change is not a character flaw. It is biology. The brain resists change because the brain is designed for survival, and survival historically meant sameness. The known was safe. The unknown was dangerous. So your brain, your brilliant, powerful, well-meaning brain, naturally tries to pull you back toward what is familiar. Even when what is familiar is misery. Even when what is familiar is mediocrity. Familiar misery feels safer than unfamiliar possibility. That is the trap. And knowing it is the beginning of escaping it. Every person who has ever changed their life has done so not because the fear disappeared but because they acted alongside it. They felt the resistance and moved anyway. They heard the discouraging voice and chose not to obey it. Not because they were fearless, no one is, but because they had found something they valued more than the comfort of staying the same. And that is what you need to find. Not motivation. Not willpower. Not discipline as an act of force. You need to find the thing you value more than comfort. Because once you find that, comfort stops being the goal. Growth becomes the goal. And a person who is genuinely growing is a person who is genuinely alive. Month 5 and 6, and I say this having watched many people walk this path, carry a specific kind of clarity that cannot be taught and cannot be rushed. It can only be earned. By month 5, you are no longer the person who started this journey. You are measurably, tangibly different. Not because 6 months made you perfect, but because 6 months of honest effort made you someone who now knows, from lived experience, that they can change. That they can commit. That they can rebuild themselves. And that knowledge, that bone-deep, experienced knowledge, is the most valuable thing a human being can possess. Because it cannot be taken from you. It becomes the ground you stand on for every challenge that comes after. The people who transform their lives are not the ones with the best plans. They are the ones who developed an unshakable relationship with themselves. Who stopped betraying the person they were trying to become. Who built a private integrity, a word they kept to themselves, a promise they refused to break even when no one was watching. Especially when no one was watching. Because in the end, all of it happens in private. The early mornings no one sees. The books read when it would have been easier to watch television. The choice made at midnight, alone, in a quiet room, to get up and do the thing anyway. That is where transformation lives. Not in the grand announcements. In the quiet, private, repeated choice to become. You see, most people are trying to change their life from the outside. They change the city, the job, the relationship, and then discover they brought themselves along. The problem followed the person. Because the real work is not rearranging the furniture. The real work is becoming someone who builds different furniture. Someone who doesn't need the same old arrangements. Someone whose inner life has grown large enough to create a different outer life naturally, inevitably, almost without effort. That is the person 6 months of genuine commitment can begin to build.